If you found this video today, I want you to know that the fact that you're here, that you're willing to learn, to understand, to take this seriously, already puts you ahead of most men your age, because this is not a conversation most men feel comfortable having. And that is exactly why I am here to have it with you. I'm Dr. Fernanda Oliveira, a board-certified urologist, and for over 15 years, I have been helping men over 50 reclaim their confidence, their vitality, and their intimate health naturally, without expensive pills and without shame. Every week on this channel, I share the kind of honest, practical, science-based guidance that I give my own patients in my office. And today's topic is one that I know, from years of experience, touches far more men than anyone openly admits. My dear friend, let me say this to you directly and warmly, right from the start. If you have ever experienced an erection that fades sooner than you hoped, if what begins well simply doesn't last the way it used to, there is absolutely no reason to feel embarrassed. None. This is one of the most common concerns that men bring to me in my practice, and I want you to hear that clearly, because most men carry this privately for months or even years before saying a word to anyone. They assume it is shameful. They assume it means something fundamental is broken. And almost universally, when they finally sit across from me and describe what they're experiencing, the relief on their face when I tell them how common this is and how addressable it is something I never take for granted. I had a patient, a kind and otherwise healthy man in his early 60s, who came in after what I could tell had been a long internal debate about whether to bring this up at all. He leaned forward slightly in his chair and said, almost in a half whisper, "Doctor, everything starts fine, but after a few minutes it just fades." And I looked at him and said, "I hear this every single week. You are not alone in this, not even close. Millions of men over 50 are experiencing exactly what you are describing. And for the vast majority of them, the underlying reasons are not mysterious, not permanent, and not beyond reach. Because here is what surprises most men when I explain it to them. For many, not all, but many, the issue is not desire. It is not testosterone, at least not primarily. It is not psychological weakness or a lack of attraction or anything that reflects on who you are as a man. For a very significant number of men, the issue is circulatory. It is vascular. It is about blood flow, specifically about whether blood can enter the erectile tissue strongly enough, stay there long enough, and whether the blood vessels involved are flexible and responsive enough to maintain that pressure through the full experience. And that is a physiological conversation, a biological one that has real practical answers. So let me explain what is actually happening, because I find that when men truly understand the mechanism, when the biology clicks into place, the path forward feels much clearer and much less intimidating. An erection, at its most fundamental level, is a hydraulic event. It happens when blood flows into two cylindrical chambers inside the penis called the corpora cavernosa. Think of them as two parallel tubes running the length of the shaft. When those chambers fill with blood and that blood is held under sufficient pressure, the tissue becomes firm. The erection is maintained as long as that blood stays in, stays pressurized, and the vessels supplying it continue to deliver adequate flow. When any part of that system underperforms, when inflow weakens, when the vessels lose their tone, when blood begins to leave the tissue too quickly, the erection begins to fade. Not because desire has gone, not because something is permanently broken, but because the hydraulics are not holding the way they used to. Think of it like filling a balloon with water through a small nozzle. If the water pressure coming in is strong and steady, the balloon stays full and firm. But if the pressure drops, or if there's a small leak somewhere, the balloon begins to soften, even if you haven't stopped filling it. That is precisely the experience many men describe. Everything starts well, but somewhere in the middle, the firmness gradually gives way. And understanding why that happens is the key to changing it. So why does this become more common after 50? Several things are happening simultaneously, and I want to walk you through each of them simply and clearly. The first and most important factor is nitric oxide. I come back to this molecule again and again in my videos because it sits at the center of so much that matters for men's vascular health after 50. Nitric oxide is produced inside the walls of your blood vessels, and its job is to send a chemical signal that tells those vessels to relax and widen. In the context of erections specifically, nitric oxide is the molecule that initiates the opening of blood flow into erectile tissue. Without sufficient nitric oxide, the vessels do not dilate adequately. Blood flow into the corpora cavernosa is restricted from the very beginning, and maintaining firmness becomes increasingly difficult. And here is the part that matters so directly for what you are experiencing. Nitric oxide production naturally and gradually declines with age. The endothelial cells, the specialized cells that line your blood vessel walls and manufacture this molecule, become less efficient after 50. They produce less of it. The signal is weaker. And as a result, even when arousal is present, even when the desire is completely there, the vascular response lags behind. The highway is there, but fewer lanes are open than used to be, and the traffic, the blood, cannot flow through as freely or as fully as it once did. The second factor is the flexibility and tone of the blood vessels themselves. Healthy blood vessels are elastic. They expand readily when nitric oxide signals them to, they hold pressure well, and they respond quickly to changes in demand. But over time, influenced by age, by inflammation, by diet, by sedentary habits, blood vessels can become stiffer and less responsive. Think of a garden hose that has been left out through many winters. When it was new, it was supple and flexible, and water flowed through it easily. After years of exposure and stress, it becomes stiffer, it bends less easily, and kinks develop that restrict the flow. That stiffening process in your blood vessels is not inevitable in its severity. It is significantly influenced by lifestyle, but it is a real contributor to why erections that once came easily and lasted reliably now require more support to maintain. The third factor is one that I think deserves its own careful moment of attention, because it is the one that is most often dismissed or minimized, and that is the role of the nervous system. Specifically, the role of stress and anxiety in erection duration. I know that when men hear psychological, they sometimes feel that they are being told the problem isn't real, or that it is somehow their fault for not being relaxed enough. That is absolutely not what I mean, and it is not how I speak to my patients. What I mean is this. Your nervous system has two modes. There is the parasympathetic mode, sometimes called rest and digest, which is the state your body needs to be in for erections to initiate and be maintained. And there is the sympathetic mode, fight or flight, which is your body's stress response. When the sympathetic system activates, blood is redirected away from non-essential areas, including the pelvic region, and toward the large muscles that would help you run or fight. This is a survival mechanism, and it is extremely effective at what it does. The problem is that even mild background anxiety, worry about performance, about whether it will last, about what your partner is thinking, can be enough to tip the nervous system toward that sympathetic state. And when that happens, blood flow to erectile tissue is actively reduced by your own physiology, even in the middle of intimacy. The erection begins to fade, not because anything is wrong with the vessels themselves, but because the nervous system has shifted gears in response to a perceived threat, even a subtle emotional one. I had a patient in his late 50s who had been struggling with this for over a year. When we talked about nervous system regulation and he began working with some simple breathing and relaxation techniques before intimacy, the improvement was, in his own words, remarkable. He hadn't needed medication. He had needed to understand what was happening and to give his nervous system permission to stay in the right state. There is also a fourth factor I want to introduce here, and it is one that most men have genuinely never considered in this context. And that is, what happens to pelvic circulation when you sit for long periods of time? Many men over 50 spend a significant portion of their day seated, at a desk, in a car, in front of a television, and prolonged sitting compresses the blood vessels and nerves of the pelvic region in a way that over time affects the health of erectile tissue. Think of a garden hose that has been bent and left that way for hours. When you straighten it out, the flow returns. But if the bending happens consistently, day after day, the hose itself begins to be affected. The tissue that relies on consistent, healthy blood flow to stay in good condition gradually receives less of it, and the functional consequences are real and measurable. And finally, I want to mention sleep, because it connects everything we have discussed in a way that is more direct than most men realize. During sleep, and specifically during REM sleep cycles, the body produces the majority of its daily testosterone. It also performs the vascular repair and recovery that keeps blood vessel walls healthy and responsive. Men who sleep poorly, who are fragmented, who wake frequently, who consistently get less than 6 or 7 hours, have measurably lower testosterone levels and demonstrably impaired vascular recovery. And the downstream effect on erection quality and duration is not subtle. Sleep is not a passive luxury. It is an active, essential biological process, and protecting it is one of the most powerful things you can do for your intimate health. Now, I want to be honest with you, as I always am. Everything I share here is educational in nature, drawn from my clinical experience and from the research that informs my practice. It is not a substitute for your own personalized medical care. If you are experiencing significant erectile dysfunction, if it is causing you real distress, if it has come on suddenly or is accompanied by other symptoms, please see a urologist. These are important conversations to have in person with a doctor who can evaluate you fully. What we are discussing today is natural, practical, daily support for the kind of gradual changes in erection quality and duration that are so common after 50 and that respond so meaningfully to lifestyle. And the good news, and there is real, genuine good news here, is that the factors we have just discussed are not fixed. Nitric oxide production can be supported through nutrition and daily habits. Vascular tone and flexibility respond to what you eat and how you move. The nervous system can be trained toward greater calm. Pelvic circulation can be improved. Sleep can be protected and deepened. None of this requires a prescription. None of it requires an expensive program. It requires understanding, consistency, and a few simple daily habits that I am going to walk you through right now. But before I do, there are several common mistakes I see men making. Well-meaning men who are trying to improve things, but inadvertently working against themselves in ways they don't realize. And the first one is something that happens before most men have even gotten out of bed in the morning. So let's start with that first mistake, because it sets the tone for everything that follows. And most men don't realize they're making it until I point it out. The mistake is ignoring morning circulation entirely. What I mean by that is this. Most men wake up, stumble to the kitchen, pour a coffee, maybe grab something quick to eat, and move into the day without giving a single thought to what their vascular system needs in those first 30 minutes. And those first 30 minutes, it turns out, matter more than most people appreciate. Here is what is happening in your body when you wake up. You have been fasting for 7 or 8 hours. You are mildly dehydrated every morning without exception because your body loses fluid overnight through breathing and temperature regulation. Your blood is slightly more viscous than it will be once you are properly hydrated, which means it flows a little less freely through your vessels. And your nitric oxide production, which follows a natural daily rhythm, is just beginning to ramp up for the day. This is the moment, this quiet window right after waking, when what you choose to put into your body first can either support that system or do nothing for it at all. The simple habit I recommend to many of my patients is this. Before your coffee, before your breakfast, within the first 15 to 20 minutes of waking, drink 1 cup of warm water with the juice of half a lemon and half a teaspoon of raw honey. Warm water is absorbed more quickly than cold, which means rehydration begins faster and blood viscosity begins to normalize sooner. Lemon provides potassium, which supports healthy blood pressure and vascular function, along with antioxidant compounds that help protect the endothelial cells, those specialized cells in your vessel walls that produce nitric oxide. And raw honey, genuine unprocessed raw honey, rather than the commercial refined variety, brings gentle anti-inflammatory properties and trace compounds that complement the whole drink in ways that are modest but real. This costs almost nothing. It takes 30 seconds to prepare, and done consistently every morning, it gives your circulatory system a genuinely supportive start before the demands of the day begin. Think of it as clearing the road before the traffic arrives. Your vessels are more open, more hydrated, more ready to respond, and everything downstream, including pelvic blood flow, benefits from that foundation. Now, the second mistake, and this one I want to spend a little more time on because it is so consistently overlooked, is failing to address magnesium deficiency. We have talked about magnesium in previous videos in the context of sleep and prostate health, but I want to bring it back here specifically in the context of vascular tone and erection quality, because the connection is direct and important. Magnesium is involved in the regulation of smooth muscle throughout the body, and your blood vessels are lined with smooth muscle. When magnesium levels are adequate, that smooth muscle can relax fully and responsively, allowing vessels to dilate when the signal comes. When magnesium is low, and I want to remind you that mild magnesium deficiency is genuinely common in men over 50, not as a scare tactic, but as a clinical reality I see reflected in my patients regularly. Vessel walls are less able to relax fully. The dilation response to nitric oxide is blunted, and the result is reduced blood flow to exactly the tissue that needs it most during intimacy. 200 to 300 milligrams of magnesium glycinate taken in the evening before sleep addresses this on two levels simultaneously. First, it begins correcting the underlying deficiency that is impairing vascular function. Second, it supports deeper, more restorative sleep. And we talked in part 1 about how critically sleep connects to testosterone production and vascular recovery. So one small evening habit is working on two of the most important underlying factors at once. As always, please speak with your own doctor before beginning any supplement, particularly if you are managing other health conditions or taking regular medications. But in my clinical experience, patients who address their magnesium consistently describe improvements in sleep quality, morning erection strength, and overall vascular responsiveness that genuinely surprise them. The third mistake is ignoring the natural vasodilators that are sitting in most people's kitchens right now, completely unused for this purpose. And by vasodilators, I mean foods and spices that support blood vessel flexibility and healthy circulation in ways that are modest individually, but meaningful when used consistently over time. Ginger is one I return to again and again because the evidence behind it is solid, and the barrier to using it is essentially zero. A few thin slices of fresh ginger steeped in hot water for 10 minutes, consumed during the day, supports circulation and has demonstrated anti-inflammatory effects on vascular tissue in multiple studies. Cinnamon, specifically half a teaspoon of real Ceylon cinnamon stirred into your morning oatmeal or coffee, supports metabolic health and blood sugar regulation, which directly influences vascular inflammation. Leafy greens, particularly spinach, rocket, and kale, are rich in dietary nitrates that the body converts into nitric oxide through a separate pathway that does not decline with age the way the enzymatic pathway does. This means that eating leafy greens is one of the most direct dietary strategies for supporting nitric oxide levels, and most men are not eating nearly enough of them. None of these are exotic. None of them require a specialty store or a significant change to how you cook. They require awareness and intention, the decision to reach for these things rather than ignoring them. And when they are used together consistently, the cumulative effect on circulatory health is genuinely meaningful. The fourth mistake is one that I find genuinely important to discuss openly, because it involves a part of the body that men rarely think about training, and that is the pelvic floor. Most people associate pelvic floor exercises with women, with postpartum recovery, with incontinence. But the pelvic floor muscles play a direct and significant role in erection quality and duration in men, and the research supporting pelvic floor training for erectile function is more robust than most men realize. Here is why it matters. The pelvic floor muscles, specifically a muscle called the bulbocavernosus, contract during an erection to help trap blood in the erectile chambers and maintain firmness. When these muscles are weak or undertrained, that trapping mechanism is less effective. Blood can leave the tissue more readily than it should, and the erection loses its firmness faster than it otherwise would. This is sometimes called venous leakage, not a dramatic medical emergency, but a functional issue with a genuinely effective solution. I had a patient, a man in his mid-60s, who had been experiencing exactly this: erections that started well but softened within a few minutes. After 6 weeks of consistent daily pelvic floor exercises, he came back and described a change in firmness and duration that he called quietly and with some emotion, life-changing. Not medication, not a device, targeted muscle training done for a few minutes every day. The exercise itself is simple. Contract the muscles you would use to stop the flow of urine midstream, that is, your pelvic floor engaging. Hold that contraction for 5 seconds, then release and relax completely for 5 seconds. That is 1 repetition. Do 10 to 15 of these repetitions once or twice daily. The key is the full relaxation between contractions. Many men squeeze and hold but never fully release, which actually reduces the effectiveness of the exercise. Contract fully, hold for 5, release completely, rest for 5. Build that rhythm, make it a daily habit, and give it at least 4 to 6 weeks before you evaluate the results. Consistency is everything here, as it is with everything we are discussing today. Now let me also come back to movement, daily movement, because in the context of erection duration specifically, the connection to pelvic circulation is one I want to make very concrete for you. When you sit for extended periods, the blood vessels and nerves supplying the pelvic region are compressed. The tissue that depends on consistent, healthy circulation to stay in good functional condition gradually receives less of it. Over days and weeks and months of predominantly sedentary living, this has a cumulative effect on erectile tissue health that shows up as the exact symptoms you may be experiencing: reduced firmness, shorter duration, slower recovery. The counteraction is beautifully simple. Stand up and move for 5 minutes every hour. A short walk around the house, some gentle stretching, a few minutes of movement, anything that releases that compression and restores blood flow to the pelvic region. After meals specifically, a 10 to 15-minute walk does double duty. It supports blood sugar regulation, which reduces the vascular inflammation we have discussed at length, and it actively pumps blood through the pelvic circulation in a way that sitting never can. Movement is medicine in the most literal physiological sense, and you do not need a gym to access it. So now let me bring the entire daily picture together for you, because I want you to leave this video with a complete, simple, realistic routine that you can begin tomorrow. Not a list of overwhelming changes, but a connected daily rhythm that addresses the underlying physiology from multiple gentle angles at once. Your morning begins with that warm lemon and honey water within 15 minutes of waking. Then a balanced breakfast, protein, healthy fat, some leafy greens if you can manage them, and if not, at minimum the avoidance of high sugar foods that will spike your blood glucose and drive vascular inflammation through the rest of the morning. Through the day, you move consistently, standing, walking, refusing to stay seated for more than an hour at a stretch. You include ginger or cinnamon somewhere in your day, because these small circulatory supporters compound beautifully over weeks of consistent use. In the evening, you do your pelvic floor exercises, 10 to 15 quiet contractions, taking perhaps 3 or 4 minutes, something you can do sitting in a chair or lying in bed before sleep. And before sleep, your magnesium glycinate, protecting the sleep that restores your testosterone and repairs your vascular walls overnight. That is the full picture. Morning hydration, balanced nutrition, consistent movement, natural vasodilators, pelvic floor training, and magnesium-supported sleep. 6 elements, every one of them simple, every one of them affordable, and all of them working together to create the physiological conditions your body needs to perform the way you want it to. And what might you begin to notice as this routine takes hold? The first signals your body sends are usually subtle. Morning erections that feel a little stronger, a little more reliable. Your body's quiet confirmation that overnight circulation and hormonal recovery are improving. Then, gradually during intimacy, a firmness that holds a little longer than it did before. A confidence that begins to return because you are no longer wondering anxiously whether things will fade. And that reduction in anxiety itself, as we discussed, further supports the parasympathetic state your nervous system needs to stay in. It becomes a positive cycle rather than a negative one. One man I worked with in his early 60s described it this way after about 6 weeks. He said, "Doctor, I stopped thinking about it. And when I stopped thinking about it, everything just worked." That is what happens when you address the physiology properly. The mental weight lifts on its own. I also want to say something about patience here because I think it is genuinely important. The changes I am describing do not happen in 3 days. They happen over weeks of consistent daily habits. Your blood vessels did not lose their flexibility overnight, and they will not regain it overnight. Your pelvic floor muscles did not weaken in a week, and they will not strengthen in a week. But the body's capacity to respond to the right support is remarkable. I say this not as encouragement for its own sake, but because I watch it happen in my practice, repeatedly, in men who had convinced themselves that this chapter of their lives was simply over. It is not over. It is responding to what you give it. And what you give it, starting tomorrow morning, can genuinely change the trajectory. My dear friend, I want to close by saying something I mean from the bottom of my heart. There is no reason, not one, to feel embarrassed about what you have been experiencing. These changes are common, they are biological, and they are not a measure of your worth or your masculinity or your value as a partner. They are signals from a body that needs a little more intentional support than it used to need. And that support is within your reach, starting today, with things you may already have in your kitchen and a few minutes of daily attention to the parts of your body that matter most. Millions of men have walked this path and come out the other side feeling stronger, more confident, and genuinely surprised by what their bodies were still capable of when given the right conditions. I believe that is available to you too. I believe it without reservation because I have seen it happen too many times to doubt it. So here is what I want you to do right now. Decide on one thing from today's video that you are going to start tomorrow. Just one. The morning lemon water, the pelvic floor exercises in the evening, adding leafy greens to one meal. Pick one, commit to it, and let the rest follow naturally from there. That is how lasting change is built. One small, consistent, intentional choice at a time. If this resonated with you today, please leave a comment below and write, "I'm trying this tonight." It tells me this information is reaching the men who genuinely need it, and it is a commitment you are making to yourself. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do, because every week I am here with honest, practical, clinically grounded guidance for men over 50, and there is always more to come. Your body is more resilient than you may currently believe. Support it properly, and it will show you what it is still capable of. Take good care of yourself, my friend. I will see you in the next one.